Well, until about 12 months ago, very few South Africans would have cared at all about audits, auditing or auditors. But since the SARS crisis and the implication of KPMG in that, and since the collapse of Steinhoff and the question about auditors and what they did to prevent the collapse at Steinhoff, and of course many, many other issues when it comes to assurance of audited results, particularly think more recently to VBS and the scandal around that bank failure in South Africa. Well, joining us on Taking Stock this evening here on ENCA is the chair, and I need to look at this because it's a long and very important title. The chair of the International Auditing Assurance Standards Board. Very important guys in terms of global auditing, and that is Professor Arnold Schilder. Now, Prof, you're in South Africa to a meeting with IRBA, the local sort of regulators of the audit profession. How worried are you about the standards of auditing globally? And then we'll focus in on South Africa, because auditing globally, Carillion in the United Kingdom and a bunch of other cases too, really being challenged and called into question.
Yeah, maybe I wouldn't use the word worried, but certainly feeling challenged. And that's why we have a very ambitious program to revise and upgrade a number of our core audit standards. The best example at the moment is what we call ISA 540, which is a standard about auditing accounting estimates, which is in the heart of every audit. And every balance sheet has a lot of estimates. So what's the value? Looking to the future, and things can change, goodwill, loan loss allowances. So how do you deal with all these uncertainties and complexities and subjectivities? And it's amazing, but that's the heart of the standard.
How is one of the problems that accounting has just become too complicated? There are just too many regulations in this attempt to try and standardize everything globally and create global standards, IFRS and every other acronym you want. Accounting's actually become more art than science, perhaps.
Yeah, but it's difficult to say too complicated, because that's just a measure or so. There is something like basic, that would be great, and now we have it too complicated. It's indeed a development that things have become more complicated. And the accounting standard IFRS 9 on estimates is a perfect example of that, long, complex standard. But that's because the world has become more complex. If you think of these large financial institutions with their huge balance sheets, that's complex. And the financial crisis was part of that complexity. So you need to address it. And as a result, our standards are also all becoming more complex, more lengthy. So we are discussing as well, can we make it more simple? But first of all, you need to do justice to the complexity in reality.
I don't expect you to know any of the detail in South Africa, but I mentioned a couple of cases: VBS Mutual Bank, the collapse of Steinhoff, the state of complicity in South Africa's state capture project by some of the audit firms. I mean, there's a deep concern in South Africa about the integrity of the audit industry. What sort of assurance have we got from the head of global assurance that this sort of stuff is being treated seriously on a global basis?
Well, simply said, we do. And these concerns are not just in South Africa. There are many countries, and your examples illustrate that, even in my home country, in the Netherlands. So there is a lot of expectation from what auditors can contribute to the reliability of reporting. And sometimes that goes wrong, and that's very unfortunate, of course. And then you have to understand root causes, and many are involved in doing that. And to some extent, there's something that standards can contribute as well. So when we decide to projects to revise standards or draft new ones, we are first of all listening to what inspectors are telling us, to what post-implementation reviews are telling us, where can you do a better job, and then we decide to our priorities. And this 540 standard that I mentioned is one of such priority. And it's basically about being more professionally skeptical, really asking the good questions, and doing a very good understanding of the company, about its financial reporting framework, about its internal controls. And it's amazing, it sounds very basic, but understanding a company and really digging into it, and that's where this skepticism has to take place. And I'm reading some of these stories as well, and sometimes you think, well, you don't even need a lot of standards to really ask the strong questions.
So where do you think it's gone wrong? I mean, in so many of the cases, when we don't care about auditing in the same way as we don't care about corporate governance, and we don't care about the rules of the road until there's a crash. And we've had lots of crashes, particularly here in South Africa. Where does it go wrong, do you think?
It depends. I think there's not just one general answer. if I go back, for example, to the financial crisis, maybe some financial institutions going down as well, and I've been a banking regulator at the time, I think in hindsight we underestimated collectively the short-term funding versus long-term funding. We took it as a given that banks would be financed day by day. And somewhere you know how it works, but it's not a real reality. So if I just use that as an example, it learns you that next time you should better understand the basic vulnerabilities, in this case of the financial sector. And sometimes it's as basic as that. Sometimes I'm reading stories to say, well, you should have asked more, and you should not have taken for granted some of the assurances that you got, whether that's from management or from an audit committee. Just stay up.
Do we put too much emphasis on audit? Are we looking in the wrong place? Because often audits can only audit what auditors presented. Should we not be interrogating managements, all as shareholders, as stakeholders, even before we get to the audit process? Should we not be more active citizens in the process of keeping companies honest?
Well, it's certainly important to go there as well. And a couple of years ago, we published a framework for audit quality, where we emphasized the importance of the interactions with all these various groups, and rightly need management and audit committee, but also users and regulators, etc. Nevertheless, being in this part of standard setting, I would say continue with asking questions to the audit profession and challenging them. This morning I've spoken here on a seminar, and we talked about audit reporting and the key audit matters. I've encouraged the audience again, stimulate auditors to really share with users what was important in their audit, what kept them awake at night. Be frank and open about it. Go out, and there's so much more probably that you can do. Also looking forward, it may not be easy, and there's technology and challenges around, but why would you be in a boring profession rather than an exciting profession?
A lot of people don't associate accounting with exciting professions.
Yeah, but that's a misunderstanding.
It's not exactly rock climbing, is it?
It is.
It's more like bungee jumping into the abyss sometimes.
Well, my children have done that in Australia, the bungee jumping, but then you are caught up and bouncing back. Here it is sometimes a challenge, so it's not cheap in any way. But in the end, somebody asked me a question about expectation gaps. I said, well, be pleased with an expectation gap, because it's telling you people have high expectations for you. But then come up, and if it's difficult to see, how can you respond better?
I mean, one of the biggest scandals in South Africa in recent years is the collapse of a global furniture retailer called Steinhoff. And there are multiple failures at multiple levels in terms of the oversight of this particular business. But ultimately, it turns out that management of the company, maybe 1, 2, maybe 5 people, ran rings around boards, ran rings around audit committees. There were 6 chartered accountants on the board of Steinhoff. And they sat on that board for 2 years before somebody rang a bell and said, perhaps there's something wrong here, and the rot is only just beginning to come out. If you are dealing with rotten management who are deliberately setting out to deceive, is there anything an auditor can ever do?
If you would have arrived at the point that that's your assessment, there are various things, of course, you can do. One obvious one is, in the end, withdrawing from the engagement to set something. I guess that would not be the first response, because you try to do things better. If it's about management, then there is an audit committee. If it's an audit committee, then you also have your external reporting. There can be reporting to regulators. My fellow members in the Ethics Standards Board have now this no-clear code, not compliance with law and regulations, so auditors sometimes need to report earlier than maybe they used to do in the past, because they were concerned about confidentiality. So there are always, I would say, a number of actions, but sometimes it might be impossible to continue. And then you have to be firm and not to stay along for too much and just hoping for the better.
It also comes down to the question of he who pays the piper plays the tune. And so often one sees the audit profession tied up in multiple conflicts of interest. We'll talk about that and other issues coming up here on Taking Stock.